thanks everyone again for joining. It's fantastic to see you here. It's been quite an interesting week. Obviously, we kind of made a soft announcement about the Documentation Academy last week, and we've had some people take on some of the tasks already. We've created some new tasks. We've got some new projects that are in the task list, including Launchpad and also a small command line tool called Ubuntu Image, which is used for building images for cloud deployment as well as for embedded devices, which is quite an interesting tool. We still really hope to add a lot more of those to those tasks, and it's the idea is still kind of percolating through the company, but the feedback inside the company has been really good. So I hope as more teams get involved, we'll have a greater diversity of tasks that people can work on. One of the things that we have been kind of talking about internally as well is opening up the scope of the tasks that we create, some of the projects that we're not directly involved with, such as Ubuntu itself and Ubuntu desktop. I think there's a really big opportunity there for us, for example, through the Academy to create a handbook, for example, that people could use with a fresh Ubuntu installation that we could be hosted online. I know there's an awful lot of Ubuntu and Ubuntu desktop documentation out there, but it is complicated, it's disconnected and all over the place, and it'd be really nice to start something fresh and give people the opportunity to create something new, and also something that would be hopefully valuable to the community and also to GNOME itself and to anybody else using and working on the tools that are inside the Ubuntu desktop. So that's something that we're kind of talking about inside among ourselves, and we'll try and keep you updated on that. I just find my plan. The plan for this is to go through those kind of really what I've told you about what's changed this week. And we also thought, and maybe this is ambitious, but I was going to try and demo the process of taking on a task from GitHub. And what you actually have to do is basically a primer to using Git. We're reluctant to use Git and GitHub because it's too technical. It's a very technical platform, and Git is even for people who are incredibly experienced developers, Git can become very quickly unwieldy and unpredictable. It's a difficult tool. It's a difficult tool for lots of things, and it's difficult for documentation. But when you keep within certain parameters, it's quite straightforward to use, and very powerful and useful in the ways that you can commit changes to a Git history, and you can see who makes those changes, and you can revert the changes. But it is, especially if you've not got any kind of experience with this, it's a difficult task to kind of ask people to take on. We discussed using, like shared Google Docs or doing things even on Discourse, the forum, and those things are actually all open. We can use those. There's no reason why we can't. But just to kind of keep everything simple and in one place, we're using GitHub, and that's where those tasks live. Even if it ends up that people write the documentation elsewhere. So even if people don't learn anything for it, I'm going to attempt to go through a kind of typical GitHub workflow for how I imagine people are using it. And I'm no Git expert, and I'm going to try and do it live, so it may all go completely wrong. We then thought it might be, depending on how things go, it might be useful to look at some of the issues that there's some of the tasks that are in the task list, and maybe have an open discussion on what might be the best way of approaching those tasks if people wanted to. And of course, there's a chance as well for anybody who wants to ask questions. If you're comfortable asking questions in the recording, and they don't mind being part of the recording, please interrupt me. I don't mind at all. If you want to click on that little hand icon in Meet, and I'll try and respond to your question. I hope that sounds okay. In terms of what's happening in the Academy inside Canonical, the feedback has been really positive. I think everybody was surprised at how engaged the communities were, and the news seemed broadly positive. So we're quite pleased, and I think the main thing that I know we've got to it's not even the beginning of the beginning, but we want to prove through our kind of keeping this up and moving the academy forward, that we're in this for like the long term. We really do want to make it part of our processes and not just some kind of idea we're going to just kind of announce and then not support. We really do intend to support it and make it part of our process. I'll just check my notes. I left them actually in a conversation channel to see what we're doing. So I'll do. I'm going to try and I'll share my screen now, and then I'll try and go through this high-level overview of what I imagine the process is, or one process you can use for working with the Open Documentation Academy and Git. Let me. Okay. This is my Linux machine here. I've got the main screen split into two. I've got the web browser over here on the left, currently open on the GitHub page for the Open Documentation Academy repository. On the right is just my terminal. I'm doing this live, so I can run through the tasks that are running on my system. The Open Documentation Academy repository is where we'll start. This page here at the top, it has columns. Issues are where we're currently filing all the tasks that we hope people would be interested in taking on. As we've documented, we kind of categorize these by project type. Here's one for LXD, for example. There are others for the Ubuntu image command line tool. They're labeled according to what we imagine their kind of size or commitment might take, whether they're a good first issue, and the kind of general things that they might involve you doing as well, such as editing or writing or just fixing something. I've created this test issue just for this demonstration, which is up here at the top. So what you'd normally do is you'd look at these issues. You'd be signed in to your own GitHub account. I'm signed in as mine, and I also happen to have created this issue, so it's a bit of an inception state here. But what you might do is you might say, hey, I'm interested in this. Provide a few details, maybe give some kind of time frame that you hope to do the work, get the work done by, and you'd have these kind of conversations with the person that created the issue, and they will invariably assign the issue to you, which they'll do as owner of the issue, and I've assigned it to myself, which is kind of meta. Now with that done, what you need to do to be able to start work on making your contribution is fork the Open Documentation Academy repository to your own account. This is basically making a copy of our own fork for yourself. You do that with the fork button up here. It takes you to a different window where it says create a new fork. And clicking on the creating fork button will do that. I'm doing this all live. It takes a few moments because there's not too much in the Open Documentation Academy repository as it is. So now this is, you can see from the top here that this is under my account, Degville/Open Documentation Academy. Here it clarifies that by saying this is a fork from the Canonical/Open Documentation Academy. So this Degville/Open Documentation Academy would be the equivalent on your account. It's your own sandbox. You can do whatever you want here. It's not going to affect what we'd call the upstream project at all. You can mess around, you can delete it, you can refork it, you can add things, so that you can work here with no fear of messing anything. And in fact, you can't really mess anything because there's a system called merge or pull requests when you want to push back the things that you've worked on to the upstream repository, to the Open Documentation Academy repository, and we'll cover that as the last step. With your own fork in place, the next step is to clone this fork to your own local system. The best way of doing this, you can find this, like this code drop down gives you some options for cloning the repository to your local system. The best way is using SSH. For this to work, you do need to have added your SSH public key to your GitHub account. GitHub has some great instructions on doing this, so I won't go over it again, but SSH is the tool you commonly use for connecting to remote systems. They live in your home directory, in your .ssh directory, and you want to copy the contents of one of these public files, the .pub, to the settings page in GitHub. When you've done that, I'm going to make a directory in my own home directory here called Coda for Canonical Open Documentation Academy. Let's cd into that. When you've done that, you can copy the URL. It's the easiest way to do it for the SSH URL. Then the first command we're going to use from Git is git clone, and then the target for that URL. So I've just pasted that in there. Cloning is basically copying the repository to your local directory. So that's just done. So now if I do an ls to list the directory, we have the Open Documentation Academy directory here, and this will contain, I haven't even got tree installed. We've got all the files that are currently in the repository locally stored. I have my shell set up to tell me which Git branch I'm in, and the default branch, in fact the only branch when you create a repository, is main, which is where things are currently live. That's how most people use them. Main is the currently active and live branch. Branches are separate areas that you kind of work on to get work done. And in fact, the first thing you should do really is check out and create a branch for you to do your work. So that's check out, B to create a new branch, and then it doesn't really matter what you call it, but I'm going to call it Coda for Canonical Open Documentation Academy and 32, because going back on the browser here on the left, the issue number that I'm working on is number 32, and it just keeps, in case you happen to be working on more than one issue, this is really just for your own use. It doesn't make any difference what you call this. When I've created that, you can see that my shell is showing me now that I'm working within a branch called Coda 32, and that's kind of separate to main now. So now locally in my own clone of the repository, I have two branches. I have main and I have Coda, and I'm working in the Coda 32 branch. So now whatever I do here, I'll be doing in the Coda 32 branch. So this task, actually, it's a made-up task, but it's to pretend we're editing this document and making some change to it. So I've linked to the document in the task. I will copy it to if Firefox will let me select all of this. I'll copy this, that's enough. I'm going to make a directory in our Coda in the repository clone, so let's call that Snapcraft. cd Snapcraft. I'm going to create a file here called, I'm calling Go Example because that's the name of it, and I'm going to paste in the contents of what I've just copied from Firefox. It's going to warn me there's lots, and it takes a few minutes because my paste is very slow. So just to go over this again, what I'm doing is I'm working in my own branch. I've created a new document. Into that document, I'm putting the contents of the task that I've been asked to edit for this particular case. I'm just pasting it in here. Let's say that it was to cut this last section. So you can, of course, use whatever editor you want. I've used Vim because it's something that I'm used to, but you could just as easily use Nano or any kind of graphical text editor you wanted to. If you're working in a text file, you might not be. So let's quit that. So the next git command, now we've made our changes, let's presume that we've fixed whatever the issue was asking us to fix. Because we've made that change, we want to add this to a change that we want to be recognized in the repository, and that's the git add command. So any file you change that you want to be included in a change, you use git add. And then after git add, you usually give a message for why you did it. Initial draft of edit. That's just a piece of text that will go along with the commit in the GitHub repo, so you can see why the change was made. Now the next command pushes the changes we've made here to what we're going to create as a new branch and our own clone of the repository. So git push origin, you will create and link the branch on our own repository if it hasn't been made, and then we're going to say we want coda32. That's the branch that we're currently working on. So git push origin -u and then the name of the branch that it created. So now it's going to push the creation of Snapcraft directory and the Go example, which we pasted the text into, back to our own repository. So going over on the left here, we can go back to the clone I made. In fact, it's already telling me that's already there, but I'm not in my own repository yet. Let's just click on this to go to it. So the degvol/Open Documentation Academy repository now has two branches. Here's main without the Snapcraft directory. If we switch here to coda32, which has appeared, this is the new branch that we created on our local system and pushed to our repository on GitHub, all within our own sandbox repository here, coda32. And we created the Snapcraft directory, and we created our Go example file that we pretend we edited and we fixed. Now GitHub has helpfully recognized that this change has been created and sees that it's different to the upstream repository, the Canonical Open Documentation Academy. And it's saying, do you want to compare this to what's already in the upstream Canonical Open Documentation Academy repository and create a pull request, which is asking to merge your changes into the Canonical repository. So we'll say yes, we can do that. And you get a chance here to review the changes that you've made and where they live. Git kind of ignores the creation of directories. And this is the new file that we've created and pasted the content into. So you typically say fixes. If you actually write fixes and then an issue number, it will automatically find the issue number in the upstream repository and link this fix to what we're trying to achieve in the issue. And then you typically say added new document to address task, something that describes the work that you've done. And then create pull request. We'll put a request on the Canonical Open Documentation Academy to pull this update into the repository and fix the issue. If we click on pull, so now I'm in the Canonical Open Documentation Academy repository, we will see that we have initial draft of edit, which is the pull request, that's the name that GitHub gave it. It's linked to this, and we can see that this is exactly the same view that we just saw when we created the pull request. Now, switching hats to a maintainer of the Canonical repository, I would review this, and really more often than not, like always really, you'd say this looks great, and you need to change a few things. There's a few typos, and this will usually be done in a kind of a review interface. So this, if I, for example, if I was reviewing the changes here and I saw this title isn't clear enough, I would put something like this: title isn't clear enough. Maybe add some more details and start a review. And I would go through reviewing the document, saying these are these things that you need to change, and then I would finish the review. I would submit a review of the pull request that the person had created, and they'd see this. Now, you as the task owner can actually go back to the work, the branch and the clone of the repository you've got on your system, and actually directly address those changes. So I think it was in the metadata. It's not there. it was a capital metadata. It was here. Does this fix the review? We'll add that. Just pretending, git add. So when you've made a change, you have to go through the add and commit stages again to leave a message, addressed, review, feedback, with again some reasons for why you did it, push, all the same commands. So git add, git commit, git push to push the changes back. And you'll see GitHub almost immediately reflect that here's the new change that we've just made in our own file. It's already been pushed to the pull request that's being worked on to see if it's addressed that. And me as the owner, as a maintainer of this repository, can then go in and see what those changes were, see if they addressed the issue that I asked to be reviewed. And you see it's got the line that I added here. And I'd say, yes, this resolves this. This is great work. And then I could, the repository is not set up to let me approve it, but we should change that actually. But if I'm happy with everything, the final step is that I merge this pull request, and it goes, when I've done that, it actually pushes all those changes into the Canonical Open Documentation Academy, and the task is closed. I'm not going to do that this time because it will do that in the repository, so I'm going to actually delete all of this and get rid of it afterwards. But that's basically the entire process of contributing, and that's the difficult process. We'll cover the easy ways in future office hours. Just 5 commands: git clone, git checkout, git add for the things you've changed, git commit for the message, git push to push those things back to your own clone, and then creating a pull request when you're happy with it. It sounds complicated if you've not worked with Git before, but once you get over that initial kind of hurdle, it's actually quite fun and very powerful because all the changes are kept and you can always see who's been working on what, who's responsible for what, and it's also a great way to collaborate with other people as well who may be working on the same files at the same time. That's it. Good luck. I realised how complicated it really is when you kind of go through it like that, and it's a lot to take on. But really, that was just to give you a kind of broad impression of how it works.